This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. For this episode of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast, we are in Southern California, San Diego, to be exact. I took the occasion of HomebrewCon to pop down to San Diego because, it'd been years since I'd been down here in San Diego. And in fact, last time I was down here in San Diego was, I think, for one of our Brewery Accelerator events. And joining me on that panel back then was Winslow Sawyer, who is my guest right now for the podcast here. Winslow, co-founder, head brewer for Pure Project. Welcome to the podcast, Winslow.
Thanks very much for having me, Jamie. I really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, we did I remember that. It was a panel on trendy styles, and you brought cans of Pure Project Rain, a lager. And this was like 2018, 2019. It was still early days for the lager trend. I think lagers in America didn't really hit full steam until the pandemic, when everyone had tank time to actually kind of explore some of these projects. Nonetheless, and I think also made some really interesting comments through that. As we had, I remember sanitation and your approach to sanitation, just kind of stuck out in my mind. Anyway, over the ensuing years, Pure Project has sent us plenty of beers, and a lot of your hazy IPAs have scored incredibly well with our blind reviewers. As well as things like your spontaneous beers, mixed culture beers, and so. Pure Project has a broad range of beers that you all are passionate about. Everything, again, from lager to spontaneous beer with a bunch of hazy IPA thrown into that mix. We're going to talk about some of the creative ways that you approach those, both from a creative standpoint and ideation standpoint, as well as figuring out ways to build personality and a Pure Project kind of angle to those beers, and any common threads that we can find through all of those things. And then, of course, how you make mixed culture and spontaneous beer down here. Quite a few, quite a bit further south than they say the typical latitudes where spontaneous beer is made. And of course, California actually has quite a few excellent spontaneous beer makers, that have cracked a code for making some of these beers in places that some folks thought that it weren't able to be made. We're going to talk about all of that. Before we do, for years, G&D Chillers has chilled the beers you love, partnering with 3,000 plus breweries across the country. They are proud of the cool partnerships they've built over the past 30 years. They know brewing doesn't stop at 5 o'clock, nor do they. G&D uses quality components, expert craftsmanship, and constant innovation. With 24/7 service and support, your brewery will never stop. Remote monitor your chiller for simple and fast access to all the information you need, providing you with the peace of mind your operation is running smoothly. Reach out for a quote today at gdchillers.com or call to discuss your next project. Also, this episode is sponsored by CanCraft. Stressed about packaging and can supply? Don't worry, CanCraft's team of design and aluminum specialists are here to make things easy by supporting you every step of the way. From aluminum cans to lids to PackTech can carriers to design help, CanCraft can provide you with a full-service packaging experience from design to delivery. Visit bsgcraftbrewing.com/cancraft to get started. And if you hear Old Orchard mentioned in the brewing community, don't be surprised. The flavored craft juice concentrate blends from Old Orchard have shipped to over 46 states. Their new brewing customers often mention discovering Old Orchard through the word-of-mouth recommendation of another brewer. To join the core of Old Orchard's brewing community, learn more at oldorchard.com/brewer. So, Winslow, let's start with your story. What's your story?
My story.
What's your brewing story? Where did it start? Where'd you catch the bug? And then what pushed you to then follow this as a career?
Yeah, definitely. Growing up in high school, I had some friends whose parents were European. So, they would let us do things at their house that other families wouldn't let us do.
So modern.
But it was a good way to, learn adult drinking culture and not, just drinking 40s in some park somewhere with your friends. So, I grew up, drinking Fullers and, good beers. And then went to college and everyone was drinking Coors Light and throwing ping pong balls in it. And I really wasn't into that. So I started brewing my own beer because I was 17 at the time and could not buy beer. So first started with, English styles, Got really into making Belgian styles because I didn't need temperature control, which was really handy in the summers in Santa Cruz. And then from there, I started working at a homebrew shop. I did my senior thesis at UC Santa Cruz on the sustainability of the brewing industry. I was in the environmental studies program and working in the sustainable agriculture part of the environmental studies program, and then ended up focusing that into beer once I was just super into beer.
Sure.
I couldn't go to breweries yet. I was 20, so I was, emailing Anchor, Steam, and all these places. I was like, hey, I guess if I do my thesis on this, they might let me in and not card me. Got to go to like all these breweries before I was 21. It was really cool. Got, tours from the head brewers, and, it was really great. And then that was kind of my segue from there. Got a job at a local homebrew shop. And it was really cool because it was the only certified organic homebrew shop in the world. Called Seven Bridges. Unfortunately, they've closed now. It was a co-op, so having 35 owners, it's hard to figure out and make it work. But I worked there for about a year, and then started working at Boulder Creek Brewing Company up in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Is that homebrew
shop where Tim Clifford was also working?
Yeah, so Tim was the front desk guy at the homebrew shop. He let me borrow his angle grinder to make my first kegel. And then when he left, he, was like, give Winslow my job. So, which is really cool. So Tim was definitely a big mentor of mine early on, and, got me into mixed fermentation stuff. And I definitely use a lot more New Zealand hops because of them. They had a really good relationship with NZ hops. And we're able to get good organics from them because there's no powdery mildew in New Zealand.
That's true. Right.
So started, my first homebrew hops were like Nelson and all these awesome hops that no one else was getting. So that was really fun. And from there, I started working at Boulder Creek Brewery, which was up in the Santa Cruz Mountains. It was the 13th craft brewery in California. So really old. I think it was started in like the mid 80s. The brewery was older than me. I started working there when I was 21, and then the next year the head brewer left, and I became the head brewer at 22, which I felt really fortunate. Most people don't get to do that unless their daddy buys them a brewery. So I've gotten really lucky in my path. Like, I had a decision to make. I was either going to be a park ranger or go work at the homebrew shop, and I'm really glad that I worked at the homebrew shop. I had to make that choice, and it was really I was just really torn because I like the woods, I like being outdoors. But I'm glad I became a brewer. Not many people get to have this lucky path.
Sure. Well, what brought you to Southern California then?
Yeah, so I was running that brewery for about 3-4 years, and then unfortunately we had like an electrical fire at the brewery, and the whole brewery burned down. It was really sad. Yeah, it was all hand tooled wood bar, and just it caught up like matchsticks, and I was pretty lost. I was 24 years old, didn't know what to do. And then I decided, San Diego was the place for me. It was a really burgeoning beer scene at the time. This was 2015, and moved south. And, first my resume was like, head brewer of this brewery. I was going to all these breweries. No one would want to hire me because I was overqualified. Then I was the cellarman there. And then eventually my resume just said bartender for 4 years. And then I was able to get a job once I dumbed it down to bartender. No, not that bartender's dumb. I'm just saying once I was able to have that job title. And from there I met my business partners, Jesse and Matt, on probrewer.com to start Pure Project with them. So I came on that team in October of 2015. And the rest is history. Yeah.
What's the idea behind Pure Project?
Yeah, the idea behind Pure Project. At the time, a lot of breweries were starting that were based around styles, right? So we're going to open a Czech lager brewery, or we're going to open a West Coast IPA brewery. Ours was always ingredients, right? My background being in sustainable agriculture, we really wanted to focus on ingredients, sustainability, and dedicate ourselves to be a 1% for the planet company.
How did that translate into what you decided to then brew and focus on?
Yeah, the big piece was we were, instead of starting with a style and then brewing that, we were starting with an ingredient and then creating style around that. So, we find this amazing Pilsner malt made by Admiral. Let's make a Pilsner. We have these amazing strawberries that a local organic farm is growing. We should make a cream ale with it and put it in it. So we didn't really, I feel like sometimes we probably make too many things. We're kind of like the master of none thing, jack of all trades. I wish I sometimes would just like focus on one thing, but I think that's the beauty of the fermentation arts. There's just so much diversity, and it's really fun to be able to make so many different things, especially being, a professional brewer. You don't have to drink the whole batch of the beer, which is great. I can make this a style that might not be my favorite style. I can have a pint of it and reflect on, whether or not I like it, or see, people in our audience enjoying the beer or not, and then, be able to change it and make it better for the next time.
Sure. So that works when you're one location and you have, maybe a 10-barrel brew house and a batch, and once it's gone, it's gone. You all have multiple tap rooms now. The business has evolved. You've had to find lanes to focus in so that so that patrons, because you're in San Diego, it's a busy beer market. There's a lot of breweries in San Diego County, and a very educated audience of beer consumers. How does that business then evolve from that early inspiration of ingredients to what it looks like now? And how do you all, then focus? I mean, I remember those early days of, you'd come out to GABF and, pouring Flanders Red and these big sour beers and, and fruited sour beers. And you won some awards for those kinds of things. And they were great. Like obviously the beer world is different now than it was then. Those aren't the most commercially viable things. Now you have to balance this idea of those beers you want to, make for the sake of making them with the things that the audience wants from you. How do you, find some pure project through line through that?
Yeah, I think the big thing is, in the end, the brewery is a business. So initially we were like, I really want to be, a farmhouse brewery and only make saisons and mixed fermentation beers. We obviously had a house West Coast IPA. You have to have an IPA when you start, but I made it decent, but like not as good as I knew it could be, because I didn't want to become an IPA factory. And
oh man, you were purposely sandbagging your IPA.
Yeah, a little bit.
Oh man, okay.
But then
because that is one of those things, like if a beer hits, you're going to be making a lot of that beer.
No, exactly. Yeah. And the brewery that I worked at before, we were making West Coast IPA.
Sure.
We were going, 10 kegs a day on the weekends of West Coast IPA. And it's like, there's so much more to beer. A big part of it was, when we started in San Diego, there was already a world-class example of every style being made. So how do we not just be another regurgitation of that? And how do we add something to the beer scene here? How do we make something new and make something that's complementary, and not just be like, oh, we're going to make a clone of, Stone IPA and try to make it like a little bit better than them and try to take their tap handles kind of thing. We wanted to do something that was a little more terroir driven with sourcing our ingredients, and open that story of how beer isn't an industrial good. It's something that does start with the farm, and then that translates all the way to the pint that you're getting.
Sure. That makes sense. I want to talk about how you actually do that, especially in some of these, specific styles that you all make a lot of beer. And before we do that, take your brewing to the next level with AccuBrew's revolutionary fermentation monitoring system, now predicting specific gravity. With AccuBrew, you'll have precise control over the fermentation process and ensure consistent, high-quality results. Their cloud-based app and compact sensor work together to monitor specific gravity, fermentation activity, clarity, and temperature. AccuBrew is CIP ready and designed to stay out of your way. Their set it and forget it solution streamlines systems and processes, confirms consistency, and helps detect problems before they ruin a batch. Join the AccuBrew community today and experience 24/7 peace of mind. Visit accubrew.io to learn more. Also, brewing is currently one of the most innovative, adaptive, and fast-paced industries in the world. With consumer demand shifting to the latest and greatest trend, it can be difficult for production teams to keep up with requirements. The ProFill series of rotary can fillers from ProBrew are accelerating plant production everywhere. These fillers can run at speeds between 100 and 600 plus cans per minute while achieving precise and consistent filling volumes not achievable by most inline and mobile fillers. For more information, visit www.probrew.com or email contact us at probrew.com to learn exactly how they can take your operations to the next level. ProBrew, brew your beer. And Tabsky QR code ordering is the future of brewery ordering. With Tabsky, your customers can order and pay for their beers right from their phones by scanning a QR code on the table, get rid of lengthy lines, and increase check size by up to 30%. Tabsky is free for operators and integrates seamlessly with popular payment systems like Clover and Square. So why not join the future of brewery ordering and give Tabsky a try? Learn how you can get started today at Tabsky, TABSKI.com. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about that. You now have some lanes you go in. Obviously, Pure Project as a brand makes a lot of hazy IPA. You make West Coast IPA now too, because consumers need that from you. You make a lot of fruit forward beers and flavored beers, and then at the same time you contrast that by making Rain, a Pilsner beer, and you also still make all of these, farmhouse style beers, mixed culture beers, and even spontaneous blend beers. As you mentioned, that you take an ingredient first approach to that. If you're talking about brewing a Pilsner, for example, how do you take, what was your ingredient approach to making a Pilsner that was going to feel right for Pure Project here in San Diego?
Yeah, so our version is a little more rustic. We actually use unmalted wheat in it.
Really?
Yeah. So we use a lot of unmalted wheat, okay. Actually, just from a sustainability point. It's not having to go through the malting process, which is energy and water intensive.
Sure.
You can't use high proportions of it because you won't be able to get the extract out of it that you want. But it's really great. We were able to get directly from the farm. It comes in a super sack, and we just have a bucket with a Sharpie line in it. We're like, that's 25 pounds. And, we use it in a lot of our beers. A lot of our beers have unmalted wheat in it. So a little bit.
What is it, what do you find that it provides other than the environmental benefit from it?
It gives a little more body, gives head retention and haze stability. So, our main Pilsner Rain is unfiltered, right? We still brew that at our original facility where we don't have a centrifuge, and it has a nice haze stability to it. Just a slight haze. It's not like that bright, plate and frame filtered Pilsner
it's
look.
Keller beer style haze more than it is,
exactly.
Than what we would call haze in the IPA realm today.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then we make it definitely San Diego style. So we don't use RO. So all of our beers are based around municipal San Diego water, which is very high in sulfate and is a lot harder. So you get a lot more hop expression with that. So we really load up that beer with a lot of Hallertau. That beer is actually our highest hot side hopping of any beer. So we're putting 1.5 pounds per barrel of Hallertau in the whirlpool of that beer, which is pretty big, just to get that big floral expression while still having a balanced bitterness. So we're not having to go really high on the IBUs.
That's quite a bit in a whirlpool for a Pilsner.
Yeah, very non-traditional. Yeah.
Interesting. What's your goal for bitterness for that beer?
I think it's somewhere. Well, the initial 90-minute editions probably 10 to 15 IBUs, and there's probably a 5 to 10 IBU at 15 minutes. It's really hard with IBUs. We've never done PCR testing for IBUs. We kind of just you learn in your brew house.
Yeah.
And I think definitely our beers have gotten as originally being a NorCal brewer, my beers were a lot less bitter initially, and now being brewing here for almost 8 years now, it's the beers have gotten more and more bitter over time. My level of where balance is for me has changed completely compared to when I was in Northern California. And, I was 10 to 15 IBUs on a Saison. And now it's looking more like 20, which is perceptible. You have that drying effect, but our big thing was always really dry beer. So getting our beers to dry out, to around 1 to 2 Plato range, really getting a lot of our beers really dry, high carbonation. So then you're not having to use a lot of IBUs to create that drying effect where you're around 3 Plato finishing gravity. You're going to need a lot of IBUs to, create that balance, but then you have more, more flabby beer.
Sure. So using unmalted wheat in this kind of Pilsner and also trying to drive a very dry beer means that, you've got to be working some mash technique to try to get that to attenuate. And then also, building a system with your cellar to get there. What do those two things then look like for you?
Yeah, really healthy yeast is really important. The first batches that we did for it was like we initially released it as an Oktoberfest beer. This was like 2018 or something like that. And the first batches we did decoction on it, and then we did a side by side to see if we liked the decoction or not. And we actually didn't like it because let's be frank, like we're making a lager so we can have a nice light dry beer, and the decoction was not. It was creating more body and sweetness because it's like an 11.5 Plato beer, so a little higher. I wish I could make it 10, but people don't have a tendency to buy beers that are under 5%, right? So if
they
this
want
was
to pay craft beer prices for beers,
exactly. Like if the beer was 4%, oh man, the decoction would be beautiful, or like a Bohemian floor malt Pilsner to give it a little more body and flavor. Right. But we just wanted it dry and lean and create body through high protein malt. Unmalted wheat. Yeah. And then just single infusion at 150 to get it nice and dry, the fermenter.
Yeah. How does fermentation then roll for you? Is there yeast that you find gets you where you need to go in that?
Yeah, we use 3470. I'm a big fan I'm a big fan of dry yeast. Okay. Like you can keep it in the fridge for when and if you need it.
Sure.
I mean, healthy fermentation is the most important part of making beer. Healthy yeast makes good beer. I mean, you can have the best recipe in the world, and if your yeast sucks, then you're not making good beer. So 3470 and just ferment it cool, 50 to 52 degrees. I don't know. I've talked to so many brewers, traditional lager brewers from all over the world, and everyone has a different technique of doing it. I'd love the idea of, we do a little bit of a de-rest on it. We let it free rise up to like 56 at the end. But I've also heard the traditional German style where you do no de-rest and then you just send it to the lager cave. And I don't know. Everyone has a different way of making it. It's weird because I've had beers that were like, oh, this is 3470. We pitched it at 64 degrees and then cooled it to 50 the next day. And I'm like, where are all the esters? Like, this should be like super estery. I don't smell any of them. So sometimes you just have to see what works with your process, because you can talk process with 100 different brewers from all over the world, and everyone's beer is going to taste so much different. Lager is one of those still mysterious things to me, whereas ale, yeast, everyone's kind of fermenting in the same range, getting their de-rest, very similar process, based on that, English brewing process. But lager is it's really varied in how people are making them. It's really interesting.
I love that the range is there because it gives me plenty of things to talk about with brewers all over the world.
Yeah.
Who all have very different opinions of these. And you're right. There's lots of different ways to get to similar ends, and great ways to make award-winning beers that people love, from single infusion to decoction to all of these. And really kind of, what I love about it is it becomes a very system focused thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What is your brew house? Where does, the malt that you're getting, the yeast that you're pulling, the exact hops that you're like, all of these things have small, little impacts on the way that you do this, and can change the, the expression of these things.
And the beers are so subtle when they're done well that any little change in the process makes a huge perceivable difference in the final product.
Yeah. So if you're thinking about your lager, then, what do you think? Obviously fermentation plays the big role in that, but are there some of those little things that you pay particular attention to through the process, that you find make big differences at the end?
Yeah, I mean, spunding the beer to get natural carbonation.
Sure.
I've talked with some continental European breweries that have. I love this like romantic idea of how continental European brewers, brew lagers, and sometimes they're not doing the things that we think that they're doing. So, talking to Czech brewers and like, oh, we don't spun, we get too much sulfur when we do that. I'm like, what? You guys don't have natural carbonation here? This is mind blown, But we try to get natural carbonation.
And I should say, some do and some don't.
Yeah, exactly.
I have seen spunding valves on tanks in Czech breweries and not seen those. Like, again, there is even there, we have a monocultural idea of the way the Germans brew lager. Well, Germans brew lager in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
Czechs brew lager in a lot of different ways, and that's what, again, keeps it interesting depending on where you are and what their process is behind it. But I can imagine for you wanting to take this kind of environmentally friendly approach, the idea of not buying CO2 from a commercial producer that's generating CO2, through a methane byproduct process would be pretty attractive.
Yeah, and I started homebrewing like everyone else, and something about bottle conditioning and keg conditioning. We still do that with all of our mixed fermentation beers, and it's mysterious. Like, is it a tighter bubble? Is it not? Is it better lacing on the beer? I don't know. The jury's out still, but there's something to like the natural carbonation that's really nice. And trying to get that nice, rocky, thick foam head that's on a good lager,
Well, there you are, using wheat to help,
to boost it up a little bit.
Man, you're cheating. Totally cheating. Well, let's talk about IPA then for a little bit. And then further on, we'll get into some of the mixed culture and fun and funky stuff. But hazy IPA in particular, is a big part of what you do. As we were talking before we started the podcast, like, craft beer is in this interesting place where it's been so flavor focused. Lager seems to be a reaction to that. Hazy IPA is very, very, focused on intense flavor. Fruit beers, very focused on intense flavor. That kind of, trading beer nerd style of, pastry stout, very focused on intense flavor, and strength. But finding some balance in that, especially, in a way that Pure Project does it with, needing to sell multiple beers to people as they come and visit a tap room. Like, you have to balance the idea of that intensity with that drinkability, and I think, so I'm curious then, as you approach a project, brewing hazy IPA, how did you start, and, how has that developed over the years now for you?
Yeah, I think, initially how I was saying we were sandbagging our IPA. I think the onset of hazy IPA was a really turning point for us where, we started trying in the back, like, Julius and these things. And we're like, wow, I think we could really like make something really interesting and expressive. So when I started brewing, it was when like West Coast IPA was just becoming a thing. And all the old head brewers were like, oh, that's not an IPA. Where's the crystal malt? Why are you dry hopping so much? All this stuff. And then it became the most popular style in the United States. And it was kind of the same thing was happening in San Diego with hazy IPA. People were like, hazy is lazy.
True. There's always going to be a generation of brewer that hates everything new.
Now I feel like I'm that guy. Like, what am I going to hate next? Like, their damn rap music, But we were trying these beers and we're like, this is such a cool expression of hops. Yeah. This is such a different thing. Also, being someone who's always into Belgian beer and English beer, the expression of yeast character is something that's very lacking in West Coast styles. It's supposed to be missing, right? You want to be clean, lean, and showcase those C hops. Whereas hazy IPA was a huge expression of the yeast, and realizing that what yeast you choose, it's going to really determine what your hazy IPA is like. And then just really getting to it and just making a lot of bad ones, and then trying to figure out how to do it right, and trying to figure out haze stability. And it was a really fun and interesting process to go through, because there were very few people that we could talk to about process. So it was kind of just us figuring it out on our own. And we also kind of coined the word murky IPA,
right.
As opposed to like the New England IPA, because we are working with municipal water here. We don't have that delicious like Brooklyn water that has no minerals in it. So being high in sulfate and high in hardness here, our hazy IPAs taste different than what you would get out of a New England IPA. We don't have that like kind of soft, pillowy ness. We have a little bit more bitterness. And it makes the beers taste a little more lean, I think, than some of the East Coast beers, which can be pretty dry, but just have that really nice, fluffy cleanness to it from the water. So we just wanted to kind of coin our own style, about it.
How does that impact then, the overall design? You, in this sense, you're fixing in, this one variable, and that's water. You're taking that off the table, which is, especially in hazy IPA, is something that most hazy IPA makers spend a lot of time working on and adjusting.
Yeah.
And so you take that off the table and say, we're gonna have to work around that. What are some of the other concessions that you then, as you're developing, what this hazy IPA is going to be for you, that you use to kind of compensate and adjust around the idea that you're not going to adjust your water?
Yeah. So we are adding chloride. So that was something that we had to figure out. Chloride was very helpful for haze stability.
So you can add, you just can't take away.
Yeah, we can't take away, right?
Yeah,
so we're starting at like 100 ppm of both chloride and sulfate and like 400 hardness, right? So that's pretty high.
Yeah.
So then we're trying to, double the chloride content to get our kind of like 2-to-1 ratio of chloride, get our chloride up so we can get some more softness to the beer, and then also keep the haze stability. And then from there,
that's a lot of overall mineral.
It's a lot of mineral, yeah. Like if you taste the water here in San Diego out of the tap, it's like, oh wow, all right. But then using high proteinous grains, so tons of oats and a little touch of unmalted wheat. But we use a lot of flaked oats and malted oats to really bring that body and the smoothness back in.
Yeah.
And then
when you say a lot, what is that in like a broader percentage range?
Like 20 to 30%.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, that is a lot.
Yeah. So then also realizing we stopped making West Coast IPA for 2 or 3 years. So then we started drying out our murky IPAs, kind of like a la, Cellar Maker, sort of that West Coast hazy. Yeah. And then we were finding that we weren't able to dry hop them as much. Like the hops were becoming kind of abrasive once we had less canvas to work with. So then we started making West Coast IPA again. Then we're like, we need to really have a contrast between our West Coast. It can't just be like, because our West Coast beers, like we didn't have a centrifuge at the time, so our West Coast beers were hazy too.
Yeah.
So like we had hazy West Coast beer, and then we had kind of West Coast murky beer. So then we were like, okay, we need to start moving these apart from each other and making them very distinct so that you have a different experience when you try each one of these styles from us. And when you order it on the menu, you wouldn't get them confused in a tasting flight. So bringing that body back up into the murky IPAs, like our singles are finishing around like 3.5 Plato. So not really high compared to like a lot of people, around 3.5, and then around 4.5 for the doubles. And then getting our West Coast like really dry down to like 1 Plato. So then there's like that contrast. But what we're finding now is there might not be enough canvas in the West Coast beers. So I don't know. It's always ever changing, right? The audience is changing as fast as you are changing the beers. And, I like Blind Pig, for example, like that was a different beer a little while ago. I love the new one. It's great. I really loved it. I wasn't a huge fan of it in the past because of the crystal malt and like the different perception of the beer. And I think it's okay to change brands. It's okay because people change. The audience changes. They want different things. And, it's all about just making people happy. That's what this is all about, right?
I always look at it, or I can fall back on my art analogy. If you look at like the history of painting, there are movements that happen in art where once somebody, puts something out there in the world and you see it, you can't unsee it. And, as an artist, as a creative person, you have to now create work in the same world that thing exists in. And you may not look at your own work the same way after you see someone else's expression like that. Like we live in this kind of world of context, right? And so people taste something else, you taste something else, and you may not be able to taste yours the same way again, but you still want it to hit in the same way. And so how do you make it hit that same way? Often that change is the thing that's necessary to make it stay the same and make it, feel still like you and also at the same time current. And so, this is that ongoing creative process that every brewer faces because we live in this world where everyone has that kind of context that is constantly changing.
Yeah, what's the idea and what's the experience of the beer, not what it is on paper. And I think us as brewers and as scientists and chemists, biologists side of the whole process, we tend to get really technical about it, and then we sometimes just forget, does it taste good? You know, and which we always have to keep coming back to.
So how do you? Well, maybe we should talk about how you make these murky IPAs taste good.
Yeah.
Again, as they continue to kind of change, and you keep trying to find the right slot from. Before we go into that, you like wildly aromatic IPAs and tropical lagers? Good thing Omega designed thiolized yeast. Just for that reason, thiolized yeast are a new tool for brewers to bring intense guava and passion fruit aromas out of your malt and hops. And wait, there's more. Omega yeast makes a yeast to order with a consistent 1-week lead time, ensuring peak freshness and reliability. Also, keep your brewery running smoothly with 5-star chemicals. Their cleaning solutions are specifically formulated to meet the unique needs of breweries, ensuring that your equipment stays clean and free of harmful bacteria and contaminants. From cleaning fermenters to kegs, they have a solution for every step of the brewing process. Use 5-star chemicals today and taste the difference in your brews. And ABS Commercial has been a full-service brewery outfitter for over 10 years. They're proud to offer brew houses, tanks, keg washers, and small parts to brewers across the country, as well as equipment for distilling, cider making, wine making, and more. They know the ins and outs of the brewing and installation process and can design the perfect setup for you, whether you're just starting out or looking to expand. Contact them today at sales@abs-commercial.com to discuss your customized brewery needs. ABS Commercial, we are brewers. All right, so the world of hazy IPA is a broad one, and there are certainly, when we talk about it as one thing, but I mean, even within this, there are definitely lanes that hazy IPA rolls in. You have your expression, but then you also have hops, and you also have other ways to kind of push levers and make these pleasurable drinking experiences. Talk to me about some of the different ways that you find expression in that. In particular, I think I've had some, you mentioned your love of New Zealand and Southern Hemisphere hops. We have, and our judges have rated some of those beers incredibly high 90s ratings, for our blind judges. Talk to me about constructing and balancing some of those intense hop flavors and finding ways to make them appealing and complementary.
Yeah, I think the big thing is it comes back to the farmer, right? Hop quality is the biggest thing. I mean, when you're dry hopping beers 4+ pounds per barrel, the hop quality it's going to be a majority of your flavor profile. Yes, you have to have a nice canvas to work with. You have to have that nice pillowy body. You have to have your water constructed right. You need an expressive yeast to give you those, a little bit of biotransformation action and the esters. But hops are the number one thing. So being able to work with our hop suppliers, we work a lot with Yakima Chief. They've been huge asset to be able to work with them. Selecting hops is really big. To be able to have a set lot of hops the entire year, that was a huge game changer for us.
And why?
Just we have consistent hops throughout the entire year, right? So we're able to. We tend to pick things off the table that are little, they're kind of outliers, right? They have more pop. We're not afraid of onion garlic also in our raw hop selection.
Yeah.
We see that a lot of those.
You said those are, you can't say onion and garlic. Like it's either OG or JC Trillium's word was allium.
Allium, yeah. So allium.
It just feels much less, it just doesn't stick in your head like that.
Yeah, but they're thiols, right?
Sure.
So thiols, when you have them very high concentration,
sulfurs,
they have thiols in high concentration smell like onion and garlic, right? So as they degrade over the crop year, those actually become really beautiful fruity flavors and become tropical. So we found that in the past where we were getting like CTZ and these crazy, varietals that are very heavy in those compounds, but as you were aging them out throughout the crop year, they were getting a lot fruitier and not perceptible like that in the final beer, especially where you have the biotransformation going on.
So those OG-ish hops on the selection table got fruitier than as they sat in your hop cooler?
Yeah, they don't really scare us off. I don't know. We're just looking for big, tropical citrus, dank, and what we know will work with our house hazy strain.
Yeah. And out here on the West Coast, like a little
weed
weedier
bag.
is
a
it's
little
okay.
Weed bag is okay.
Yeah. Everyone's cool with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
As you're building hop blends, what's your process look like? How do you go, think about these kinds of things?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd love to do single hop beers, but some of the most amazing new hops that are coming out don't perform well as single hops, right? So like Sabro is a very classic example. That hop is amazing. Its expression is so intense per pound of what you use, and the fruit is amazing in the context of a portion of the dry hop and used in conjunction with other tropical hops. But if you have it all by itself, then the coconut gets so intense that it ends up tasting like dill, and then now it's vegetal. It goes past being fruity and being vegetal. So I feel like, when people start doing these experimental hop beers with these experimental hops, you have a few, as a consumer, you have a few made that are heavy handed with it, and then it ruins the hop for you. So then it's like, now no one wants that bro. Like, I mean, you're either a bro guy or you're not a bro guy, right? I'm a bro guy.
Okay.
We don't use it that often though, because I'm scared if people are going to buy it or not.
You ever use it and not put it on a label?
No, we like to be very transparent about our ingredients, right? So it being,
because that is the thing, like, I mean, with a consumer, you with all of these ingredients, if you put it on a label, people will then use that. Consumers will use that as their touchstone. Like they will, triangulate and measure, like, how much of this did I get?
Yeah,
exactly. Like, you put cinnamon on a label, you put vanilla on a label. Like, well, I didn't get the vanilla in that. Like, you have to be careful about what, and there's always that question out there. Like, you go to a fine dining restaurant and no chef's going to give you the list of ingredients.
They're not going to tell you how much MSG they put in it.
They're going to tell you, like, a few key high points. They're going to help you order that off of a menu, but they don't need to get into all the details around that. And, brewers, in that interest of transparency of often, like, but hops also can market a beer, and you see, Citra, I like Citra. It's almost like using style, or just like a style subset as a shorthand to help people kind of connect with beers and want to order them and want to take a risk on that. It's kind of...
Yeah, so that's a big way of how we approach our hop blending is we like to have a baseline, right? So Mosaic or Citra are usually that baseline for us. And depending whether we're trying to go citrusy or tropical or dank, we decide which one will be that base. And definitely when we're doing experimental, we work with the New Zealand hop breeding program. And so when we're doing those experimental beers, we actually put a baseline to Mosaic because we know what that tastes like, and we know that the experimental hop won't make this beer like undrinkable if it has something really crazy in it. But we know we'll still have an enjoyable beer. As brewers and working with this Mosaic for an entire year, we know how to subtract that out of our palate, and we know what we're tasting from the experimental hop.
Yeah. Interesting. So Mosaic is that for you?
Mosaic is like a really big go-to. It's our salt, It's like just salt and everything,
That's your through line. Your selected Mosaic is the thing that gets it done.
Yeah, Loftus Farms. We blind select it like almost every year. Yeah. So pretty amazing.
It's funny. I'm hearing that more and more from folks. Russian River is the same way. Weldworks is the same way. Like, they are. Once you find the thing you like, oftentimes, even if you go back to blind selection, like, it's generally the same. And
unless you have a crazy grow year on the farm, and some you have just weirdness, but yeah.
Sure. Are there other techniques that you use in selecting some of these hops and finding ways to blend them, or are there some other hops that become some of your smaller percentage, go to put a fine point on things in a hop blend kind of hop?
Yeah, definitely. We make some pretty high ABV IPAs as well, and as the ABV goes higher, we tend to stray away from danker hops. We find kind of like, when you proof whiskey to go into a barrel, you get different flavors from the oak. The same thing kind of happens with hops. So like in our pale ales, always these amazing floral expressions, lighter, tropical. And as you get bigger and bigger and bigger, the alcohol extraction is giving you way more dank, sweaty, when you can kind of get like that armpit sometimes, sweaty socks. So you have to be really, you have to be really careful what you're putting in those big IPAs. So like we like things like Waiiti, for example, really low alpha New Zealand hop. We like to put in that in our really big IPAs because it gives us fruitiness without giving us sweatiness.
Interesting. Any other, hops that you use in certain ABV levels and not others?
So this is the first year that we selected for Cascade, actually, and we're blown away by the quality of the Cascade. We're really happy with it. So we've been messing around with it here and there. that's going to be another one when we put it on the label. People are going to be like, I don't know if I like that. Should I buy that beer? I've had some bad Cascade beers. But I mean, so much acreage has been ripped out of Cascade for things like Mosaic and Citra and Strata that the Cascade that's left it's really good. It's really good.
I mean, all of these hops have lifespan, right? 15-ish years, for any of the plants before they've all got to be replaced anyway. And so, I guess some renewal around some of these things.
And also the growers know what we're looking for now. There's a lot more interplay going back and forth. YCH is now, they were just telling me last night that they're going to have a new thing at selection this year where they're taking all the feedback from our selection process for the last few years and they're putting it into this like algorithm that's going to help spit out actual like lots that we'll like instead of them having to physically go in and do sensory on them and then try and give them to us. So there's really exciting stuff. And I think the most important thing is the communication.
Is that a useful use of AI? What?
Yeah. So the communication between the brewer, well, the audience, the brewers, and then the brewers back to the farmers is really important. And that was a really big eye opener the first time I went to New Zealand for hop selection. Is like I was going to these hop farms and I'm going to this, organic hop farm that I've been really cool to meet the guy. I've been using his hop for 12 years and I finally get to meet him. And I'm like, oh, I love your, I love every hop that you grow. I love your Pacific Jade. They're like so fruity and good. And he's like, I grew a 20 alpha motuer, and that's like the biggest thing he's proud of. And I'm like, Colin, like you don't understand what we do with your product at all, do you? And he's like, what do you mean? I grew a 20 alpha motuer. Didn't you hear what I said? So there's there's a disconnect sometimes between the people who are growing our ingredients and the final people who are drinking our beer. So we need to be that intermediary between them. So we can make them successful, because without successful farmers, we won't have successful breweries.
100%. We had Ron Beetson on the podcast a couple weeks ago. Had a fantastic, they are connecting the dots again in between, growers and hop breeders and,
that's really cool.
The varieties that the brewers want. But I do want to get back to this because obviously you've spent a lot of time, playing in this hop world. Are there other combinations that you find yourself going to? And are there other, what is it about like Cascade? Where are you going to use that now that you've got this beautiful Cascade coming in this year? Are there some of these specific things that you're finding places for that may be unexpected, unusual, or specific ways, other ways you use certain hops, but not others?
Yeah. So it's really nice. We still have our original smaller brewery, which is like a 7-barrel brew house, 15-barrel fermenters. So we can play around with more experimental stuff. And I think we're just trying to now, going through the experience that we had with like Sabro, trying to find how to correctly use hops, because now it's being bred. I mean, there's just hops are just so out there, like they don't smell like hops. So how do you use them and still create what people think of as beer, right? Or IPA. So really just working with the ingredients firsthand and trying not to be too heavy-handed with them. I think that's the big thing. And using them in blends, using them to showcase other aspects of, maybe showcase the fruitiness of the yeast that you're using or interacting with another fruit or a spice. I think those are kind of the next levels of how to use hops.
Are there any specific applications like that you're finding? Is there a beer or two that you've designed over the last year where, you've, in order to kind of maximize some of these flavors that are inspiring you from these hops or aromas that, you've made some other recipe decisions around that?
Yeah. So, I mean, every year we try to do wet hop beers, and we're trying to figure out how to make them better and have them be more, they taste good for more than a week. That's very difficult to do with wet hop beers. So this last year, we actually did a spontaneous beer with Strata hops, and then we aged it for 6 months in oak barrels, and then we worked with indie hops. We racked the barrels into our blending tote, and we put all the wet hops into the blending tote, and the next day bottled the beer in a hope that bottle conditioning the beer would kind of freeze that wet hop experience in time. But what we were really surprised about was the kind of like biotransformation that happened with the Brett that was in the beer. And it just, if I handed you the beer, you wouldn't be able to tell if it was hops or, wild yeast or fruit that was giving it. It has this crazy like peach strawberry thing, and you definitely would not be able to tell it was Strata specifically. But you can tell it's hoppy, but it's hard to tell where one thing ends and the next begins. So trying those kind of the interplay between different yeast strains and hops, I think, is really big.
Well, you just gave me a segue into talking about mixed culture beers here. But let me back up on that. So you brewed a spontaneous beer that you wet with wet hop strata.
Yeah.
So not aged low alpha, no bullish hops, not stuff that you've, shredded the alpha on down to the, 1 or 2% range by making sure that it's dry and brittle, but actually wet hops. How did that even work in a spontaneous beer?
So it was spontaneous, but we also put some Brett in it.
Okay.
So we knew there was a little baseline of Brett in it. It wasn't like our normal like method traditional stuff, but we left it. We open fermented the beer the entire time, and then put it into barrels. And there's definitely like a lactic acid bacteria going on and some wild yeast stuff going on. But we just we're really trying to capture that wet hop because it's so delicate and so ephemeral, and it's so fleeting. You only have it for a moment, and these beers are so amazing. You only get to have them for like 1 week a year. And, I go to Bale Breaker at Hop Harvest up in Yakima, and I'm just blown away by the stuff that they're doing with these wet hops. And it's like, I guess you have to have your own hop farm to be able to make wet hop beers this good, right?
You just have to be in Yakima because, whether you're Bale Breaker or Single Hill or Varietal. I mean, we were up there last year for Harvest. Killer.
They're insane, right?
At all
They're
of
insane.
Them,
that was one of those things I couldn't unsee. I tried those beers and I'm like, I can't unsee this.
Yeah.
How do I do this? I don't know. I can't figure it out.
Well, and then I think, especially when it comes to fresh hop beers, it's easy to, and so that everyone knows, I've got a great panel discussion on brewing fresh hop beers coming up at the end of July with some folks that are actually brewing some beers for that podcast. Specifically, I'll have more about that in the future, but it's going to be good. You don't want to miss it. We're trying to time it so that it'll be out the end of July, right as we start, kicking
harvest,
the front end. Well, I mean, it's pre-harvest, but we'll have the podcast to be out there. So people, as they're getting into their, in August, they're
getting the boots on and
they're planning their brews. They'll have some of that information out there. Anyway, that aside, I'm curious, when you brew fresh hop beers, obviously dry hopping can stomp all over that fresh hop, character of the beer itself. And so,
we try to dry hop with the wet hops.
With the wet hops.
That's the biggest thing we're trying to figure out, and trying to get the
vegetal on top of vegetal then.
Yeah. So we're usually brewing the beer a week or two before the beers are harvest, and then putting the wet hops into like what we'd use for like adjuncting our stouts, like a brink, and recirculating through them. But it's really hard to get all the oxygen out. So then the beers are like 2-3 days and then they're toast. So, trying to, do something with like liquid nitrogen, or trying to find a better way to purge out the hops so we can get some more, shelf stability out of it. Yakima Chief was telling me they have a new product that's, it's like cryo wet hops that are like frozen. So maybe we'll try a little of that. Who knows? Yeah.
We'll have some beers later in July brewed with that kind of, product. For the spontaneous beer that you make, is that hot side wet hopped then? And
no, so the wet hop was in the blending tote. So the beer was brewed with pellet T90 Strata on the hot side.
Okay.
Pretty high IBU load because we didn't want it getting sour. Sour and hoppy it's like pickly,
Yeah.
So we, pretty high IBU load, big whirlpool addition of Strata, and then open fermented, then into barrels for 6 months. And then the day before we knew the hops were getting picked, we into a blending tote and then put the wet hops in there.
Huh.
Yeah. And then bottled the next day.
How do you get any reasonable extraction of wet hop flavor with a kind of cold maceration of wet hops in that kind of...
it was great.
Okay.
Yeah, it worked really well.
Yeah?
Yeah. You just got to use enough of it.
Okay.
That's the trick, yeah.
How much is that? Like,
oh, man. This was last harvest. I think it was... it was like equivalent to 1 to 2 pounds per barrel of T90s, so 10 pounds per barrel
of the wet
of
hops.
wet hops.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, as you think about the sensory, impact of that, like how would you describe the flavor? You mentioned, you got some, what I would expect out of Strata, so like, that kind of peach character.
Yeah, really fruity, floral, really fruity. Yeah, and then all of the kind of herbal. There's no herbal aspect to it, and what kind of you'd think of as like the classic like sea hop flavor. None of that. Just really fruity and not a lot of bitterness because it's not dried yet, not concentrated. So it has a nice balance to it. Especially being such a dry, finishing at 0 residual sugar, you need to be really careful with how much additional bitterness you're putting in, even with a dry hop.
Sure. Wet hop spontaneous beer. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean,
this is where we are in 2023. But let's talk about your kind of spontaneous and mixed culture beer program, in a broader sense. What do you? We here at HomebrewCon, you just did a presentation at HomebrewCon about spontaneous fermentation. Clearly, it's something that you're passionate about, but also you're kind of more Brett-focused mixed fermentation beers that are more managed than the spontaneous beers, or at least more controlled variables. Are also are a big part of what that does. When you talk to me about your philosophical position coming into that and how that manifests itself in some of the specific lanes of beers that you make in that world.
Yeah, I definitely a lot of the time take more of like the artist approach than the scientist approach. And I think the mixed fermentation side is really fun for that. Especially with spontaneous beer, the barrel is kind of like this black box, right? You do everything on brew day, and then you put it into this black box and you don't know what you're going to get out the other side. And that's where a big part of it is blending in the end, for consistent flavor profile and just, editing. It's not that the best breweries don't make bad beer. It's just you never get to try it. That's a big part of it is editing, right?
When you say that, it's funny. I've had plenty of conversations with brewers about this when they want to become distillers. And like distilling is also just that. Like,
interesting, huh?
It is, the distilling is just a statistical game. Like good distillers. It's not that, it's not that they have some great recipe. It's just that you have so many barrels that you can pick the good ones and make good brands out of that. And you can take the bad barrels and you can make Fireball out of it. It's just, and so it really just is.
Everyone needs their Bogle.
It's just a numbers game, but that's an expensive one for brewers to approach from if you're launching a spontaneous program. It's not like you're going to go, brew 100 barrels and only release 20, barrels worth of beer. Like you can't afford to do that. That's not what, that's just not going to achieve the commercial success that you need out of this.
But there's other things that you can do with the beer, right? So like if you have a base and you're like, this doesn't have the acid profile or funk that I want to see, then you'd be like, this can be a fruited version of our spontaneous beer. There's a lot of different things that you can do with it, putting into blends with other things that need more character or body. The spontaneous base, we follow the method traditionnel guidelines, so very high complex base that is really good to blend with our other mixed ferm beers that are more kind of just like single infusion and then clean fermented with sack and stainless before going into pre-inoculated barrels. Very different approaches, right, to the kind of similar thing. So then being able to blend, it's all about having the variety in your barrel stock, I think, is the biggest thing, because it gives you a lot more options as far as what you can do with it. And in the end, the fruited ones are going to sell the best, right? So it only really matters what we brew if we can sell it. Our goose-inspired beer obviously has a great story behind it, and like the 1% of beer drinkers who know what that is might be stoked on it, and the other 99% are like, why the hell did I get this in my tasting flight today? I don't like this style, half a bottle cap on Untapped kind of people. But that's the nature of it, right? Like not everyone's going to like that, and not everyone's going to understand the story behind the beer and why it matters and what it is. But the thing that really, brings me back to the mixed ferm and spontaneous beers is just, it gets me in touch with history. And also it's kind of like freezing a moment in time, right? Being able, what's in bottles right now of our 3-year blend. I brewed that 4 years ago. I can think about who I was. I was still in my 20s back then. It's like, oh man, what was I doing? Where was I living? Who were my friends back then? What did I think? Who did I think I wanted to be now? You can think back about your past self. It's like I always think about this, like we have this idea of who we want to be in the future, right? And we have hindsight's 2020. We know who we were, but it's really hard to see who you are right now, and how that correlates to that person you were and that person you want to be. And those beers can sometimes give me a good reference point and put me in the moment where I can kind of think about the thinking beers,
Sure. And then of course you bottle them now, and then
you gotta wait.
And in 2 or 3 years, when you go back to them, they then reflect, all over again, and they continue to develop over that time as well. For sure. What are some of, when you're making these spontaneous beers here in a very warm environment?
Yeah.
Well, I shouldn't say warm. It's really pleasant here in San Diego.
Yeah, it's nice right now.
I think some people have this kind of like fake or a misleading idea of California weather based on some of the news that we tend to get.
Everything's on fire.
Everything is on fire.
It's either soaking wet or it's on fire.
Yeah. But it's like, it's June and it's in the, it's like a high of 70 today. It's breezy. It's sunny. It's really beautiful. And the ocean here controls, the weather.
It's great for aging barrels. We don't have to do any temperature control in our warehouse. It stays at a nice, 60 degrees all year round. So really nice cellar temperature. So we're not getting too much lactic acid bacteria going on. We're able to keep the acidity of our beers down, which is really nice. And as far as the spontaneous beers go, we just kind of wait until it gets cold. Like feel like it's cold enough. Usually we're brewing some like in December, January, maybe sometimes into March when it starts warming up. We've done some warmer temperature spontaneous beers, and it didn't get too crazy away from what our middle of winter brews are like. But also we take our spontaneous beers camping with us. Like one year we took them out into a mountain here, and we camped in the snow with it. And it was too cold. We did not get enough stuff out of the air, and it didn't ferment for like a week. I was like, what are we gonna do with this? It's never gonna ferment. And then it fermented. It wasn't quite like in line with what I think our house flavor is, but it was a good blending stock. It was definitely very light on acid. But
do you take any steps like, say pre-acidifying in order to kind of, protect some of these beers?
Yeah, definitely. We've, the method traditional guidelines, you can pre-acidify down to 4.4 pH in your cool ship. We've done that, had discussions with our other brewers that, other breweries are getting away from pre-acidification. I am, being in a warmer climate does make me a little nervous. And it's one of those things like you spend a whole day to already make this, and why would you just risk it? I mean, it's already kind of risky to make spawn beer in the first place. Yeah. And a big part, I'm not worried about
that debate about pre-acidification is still out there amongst Belgian lambic brewers, and so that's not even settled there.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that there's a single
it's not that
doctrine
much.
on this. Yeah.
It's like in a 7-barrel batch, we're putting like 0.8 liters of lactic acid, 800 mils. It's not a ton. It's just enough to bring it down,
Yeah.
And we're not going below 4.4, which is not that low.
Sure. When, with this style of beer, in order to achieve the flavor that you want, getting that right blend of funk in this is just one of those key components. How do you maximize and steer these beers to kind of, capture that kind of beautiful, funky expression?
Well, being in San Diego, our spawn beer is very hop forward.
Yeah, okay.
So like kind of that big, like cheesy tobacco note that you can get from like a Cantillon or something like that. We tend to be pretty heavy handed with the hops. And something that we do to make it sort of like our own thing is we dry hop it in the blending tote.
Huh.
So after we do our final blend, we'll dry hop with a little bit of aged hops, but the day before we bottle. That's kind of just like a little signature thing. We want to make the beer be a representation of place, and we want to bring as much San Diego into that. So using municipal water, using California grown grain, you got to dry hop it, right? That makes it a San Diego beer.
It does sound like what a San Diego spontaneously fermented beer should be, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's pull out a little bit. Let's look at the big picture. Obviously, when you all started Pure Project, you did it with a principled idea that you wanted to give back, be a good business, 1% for the planet, support sustainable agriculture, support locally grown ingredients as much as possible, and approach it from that standpoint. As you look back at it now, how are you doing on that? Are you achieving what you set out to achieve? What do you hope to then achieve over the next, 5 or 10 years now with Pure Project? If you're looking back, how does it look? And, what does the future, the near term and longer term future look like now?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even through COVID and everything, I feel very proud that we weren't having to skip any of our 1% for the planet donations. Feel very proud that we've done that. We've given over $300,000 at this point to 1% for the planet. So hopefully that's made a small difference in the world in a positive way. Our business has definitely changed over the years. We were very retail oriented business before. We were very lucky to start making murky IPAs when we did. We were very can release oriented. People came to us and left with cases and cases of cans. And that was amazing. And as COVID has happened and we have grown as a brand and our team has grown and gotten older and wanted to have kids and 401ks and all those things that make actually careers out of this industry. We're looking now as now becoming more of a distribution brewery. This is something that's changed over the last year. We have 5 tasting rooms, which is amazing. We're still able to move a majority of our beer through our retail outlets. But now as we have a bigger brewery and last year, I think we made 6,000 barrels and we're looking at our capacity of being able to make 12. We can't move 6,000 more barrels through our tasting rooms, right? So as we're becoming a wholesale and slightly distribution-based brewery, we're trying to ask ourselves, how can we dedicate ourselves to those tenets that we built the business on, right? As grain prices increase, as fruit prices increase, as every, packaging component increases, but the price of beer is not going up, how do we keep, true to ourselves and true to our employees to make sure that Pure Project is still what it is? And that's something that's a big piece of my job, right? Is making sure we're having those conversations and making sure we're only growing in the way that we're able to stay true to ourselves and stay true to our customers and stay true to our employees.
It's an ongoing problem to have to keep solving for and keep adjusting for and adapting around the constantly evolving situations that we're in here in the brewing world. Yeah.
The new normal, right?
Well, yeah. And as soon as we get used to this,
new.
It's going to be something new. But that's the nature of life and existence, right?
It makes it fun, right?
We're in a constant state of flow, and nothing is static. Nothing stays the same for too long, but at the same time, keeps it interesting.
Yeah.
Gives us new challenges to solve all the time. I think that's a great place to bring this to a close. G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, and reliability with 24/7 service and support. CanCraft can provide you with a full-service packaging experience. Try Old Orchard's flavored craft juice concentrate blends in your next craft beverage. Join the AccuBrew community and experience 24/7 peace of mind. ProBrew's rotary can fillers reduce waste and produce higher quality packaged beer. Omega's thiolized yeasts bring intense guava and passion fruit aromas out of your malt and hops. Keep your brewery running smoothly with 5-star chemicals, and ABS Commercial is your full-service brewery outfitter. If you've enjoyed this podcast, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button. Winslow loves the magazine.
I love the magazine. Yeah.
Everyone should subscribe if you're listening right here to this podcast. We put a lot of work into it, and we want everyone out there who's passionate about brewing to enjoy what we put into it, and we get to share great ideas, great thoughts, great brewing approaches from so many great brewers around the country and around the world. So do that. Go to beerandbrewing.com for that. Winslow, if people want to learn more about Pure Project, where do they find you guys in real life and out there on the internet?
Yeah, so our website's purebrewing.org, PURE.org. Don't forget the .org. It's the best place to find us, and then Instagram is probably the best place for where we're doing most of our communication about what beers are coming out and what food trucks are tasting rooms. And that's Pure Brewing, at Pure Brewing.
Sounds good. Well, I appreciate you talking to me about the way that you brew at Pure Project. Cheers.
Thanks.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.